Welcome to this explainer. Today we're exploring the Ascension arc. It's a fascinating journey from mortality to self-discovery.
We all face one massive problem, right? Our physical existence is strictly limited. So how do we live forever?
Yeah, we will die. These undeniable physical limits absolutely force us to focus on what actually survives us.
The answer? Saleh Amal. Righteous deeds receive a divine lifespan, totally outliving our temporary physical bodies. Think of these deeds as invisible infrastructure, kind of like underground pipes quietly sustaining the next generations. Now, superior physical senses don't define humanity at all. I mean, just compare our senses to dogs or crows.
Instead, our true superpower is our unique capacity to learn. We constantly ask why, how, and what.
And get this, that miraculous capacity to learn and ask questions actually elevates humanity way above the angels.
This highlights a subtle theological nuance. There's a huge difference between doing righteous actions and complete spiritual acceptance. Is a two-way street of divine love, beautifully reflecting the dual, reciprocal nature of God's name, El Vadud.
So, the key is understanding Esmâu'l Husna, the beautiful names. Let's quickly break down its two linguistic roots.
First is visum, a divine mark. Righteous deeds literally leave an invisible medal of honor on a person's face.
The second root, sumu, means elevation. Learning these names lifts our consciousness way above mere physical matter.
Just imagine these beautiful names as a divine rope ladder dropped directly from heaven to elevate human consciousness.
These names act as a perfect bridge. They balance our need to understand with the reality of divine transcendence.
See how this progression pushes our minds forward? We move from basic, surface-level knowledge to true, deep understanding. Because studying the Creator's attributes doesn't just teach us about God, it unlocks our own core identity.
The ultimate climax of this spiritual ascent is ancient wisdom. Truly knowing the divine means truly knowing yourself.
So since your lifespan is strictly limited, what lasting legacy will you leave, and how high will you climb?
Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a profoundly transformative concept pulled straight from the deep teachings of Islamic philosophy. We're going to reframe the beautiful names of Allah, the Esmâu'l Husna. We're not just looking at them as some traditional list of words you have to memorize in a theology class, but as a dynamic, living blueprint for our very own spiritual immortality. Seriously, if you think you already know what these names represent, get ready, because we're about to look at them through an entirely new lens. So right off the bat, how can mortal beings ever leave an immortal legacy? It's kind of the ultimate human dilemma, right? As physical beings, our baseline limits are just incredibly strict. Our vision is limited, our hearing is restricted, our physical strength definitely wanes over time, and most obviously, our lifespans are remarkably short. We are constrained beings worshiping a totally limitless God. But here's the incredible paradox drawn from our source material. While the physical human body inevitably perishes, our Saleh Amal, our righteous deeds, actually do not. God literally breathes an eternal lifespan into righteous actions. Just think about it for a second. A scholar like Tabari passed away 1,200 years ago, yet his texts are still sitting on desks today, actively guiding people. His physical body is long gone, but his righteous work was granted this amazing immortality by the Creator. Which brings us to Section 1, Limited Human, Unlimited Deeds. This marks the beginning of our climb. To transcend our fragile mortal limits and actually create those unlimited deeds, we've got to first understand the true nature of our devotion. It's really not just about going through the motions. There's a beautiful, crucial distinction here. Often, we think of devotion just as ibadat, which basically means doing what pleases the Creator. You obey, you follow the rules. But there is a much higher, far more profound level called ubudiyat. Ubudiyat isn't just an action, it's an entire state of being. It means being entirely pleased and satisfied with what God does. It's a mutual satisfaction. The source material actually connects this to the divine name Al-Wadud, the most loving, which implies this beautiful two-way street, loving and being loved, pleasing and being pleased. But to reach the state of ubudiyat, to truly be pleased with the Creator, you have to deeply know and understand Him.
Let's move to Section 2, Senses and the Miracle of Learning. Let's see how this builds, because this is where our normal assumptions about human greatness get completely flipped upside down.
We naturally tend to think human superiority comes from our physical interaction with the world. But let me give you a quick reality check here. If physical senses are what define greatness, aren't the animals entirely superior to us? Look at the numbers. An elephant's hearing is literally 100 times better than yours. A dog's sense of smell is 35 times greater. A crow's visual acuity is 200 times sharper than a human eye. 200. If navigating the physical world was the absolute peak of existence, well, a crow would be vastly superior to a human being. So if it's not our physical senses, what actually makes us distinct? The answer is so simple yet so profound. Learning is a miracle. This right here is the dividing line. Animals rely entirely on physical data. Sure, they can be trained through repetition, what we call terbiya. A horse can be trained to respond to a physical cue, absolutely. But a horse will never stop and ask why or how. Only humans ask questions. Only humans can abstract meaning from the universe. This is exactly why the first word of revelation was read or learn, and why the capacity to learn the names of things is what elevated Adam above the angels. Our unique miracle is our intellect, our pure ability to seek knowledge way beyond the physical realm. And that leads perfectly into Section 3. He who knows himself knows his Lord. This is our core thesis today. If our defining miracle is this amazing capacity to learn and abstract, what is its ultimate purpose? Well, it's entirely designed for self-discovery and divine connection. In Islamic thought, there's a term called ma'rifatullah. It goes way, way beyond just acknowledging that a creator exists. We aren't talking about surface-level data. It is a profound, deep, internalized understanding of God. But here is the secret the source reveals. We can only understand God, we can only reach ma'rifatullah to the exact extent that we understand ourselves. If you turn away from understanding God, you're actually actively alienating yourself from your very own essence. You literally end up in conflict with your own nature. And honestly, it all boils down beautifully to that ancient, famous phrase, "He who knows himself knows his Lord." Exploring the beautiful names of God, the Esmâu'l Husna, isn't just a dry theology lecture where you memorize a bunch of attributes. It is fundamentally a masterclass in knowing who you truly are. When you study the names, you're essentially holding up a mirror to your own soul, discovering your boundless potential and your ultimate origin. Let's dig into the mechanics of this in Section 4, the root of names, mark and elevation. Words hold immense power, right? So let's decode the actual Arabic etymology of the word Esma to map out this whole philosophical framework. The word Esma actually stems from two distinct, fascinating roots. The first is vezm, which means a mark, a sign, or a medal of honor. The source provides this stunning visual for it. The mark of prostration on a believer's face. It's not just a physical callus, it's a spiritual medal of honor that distinguishes a person, kind of like a badge on a champion. The second root is sumu, which means elevation, rising up, and excellence. In fact, it's where the Arabic word for the sky, sema, comes from. So knowing the names is literally about acquiring a spiritual medal of honor that elevates your soul upwards. But here's a mental roadblock. How do we, with our tiny human minds, comprehend a limitless God without accidentally bringing him down to a mere human level? Well, the names provide this delicate, perfect balance between two profound concepts, tashbih and tanzih. Tashbih is immanence. It's using attributes we can sort of relate to, like mercy or knowledge, to help our finite brains grasp the divine. Tanzih, on the other hand, is absolute transcendence. It's the crucial understanding that despite us using these familiar words, God is entirely beyond our physical reality and comprehension. You know, unlike certain ancient traditions where the divine name was kept entirely secret by some elite few because God was considered too distant to even be named, Islam throws the doors wide open. It opens the beautiful names to everyone, using this balance to invite every single human being to step up and connect. To really grasp this transcendence, think about how we differ from the divine through the concepts of huviyat, your identity, and mahiyat, your essence. It's like this. If I take a glass cup and melt it down to make a pitcher, its identity, its huviyat, has clearly changed from a cup to a pitcher. But its essence, its mahiyat, the glass material itself, remains exactly the same. Or take water. You can break its essence down into hydrogen and oxygen. We physical beings are made of parts. Our identity and our essence can be completely separated. But God is Samed, the absolute. He is an indivisible whole, where identity and essence are perfectly, infinitely one. He absolutely cannot be broken down into parts. Which brings us to our climax in Section 5, the ladder reaching to the heavens. How do these deep, highly philosophical names practically function in our everyday spiritual lives? Like, what do we actually do with this knowledge on a Tuesday? There is this spectacularly beautiful metaphor hidden in the Arabic language with the word sabab. In its linguistic roots, a sabab is a rope ladder that gets let down from the very top of a towering palm tree, allowing someone on the ground to grab hold and climb up to gather the fruit. The Esmâu'l Husna, the beautiful names, act exactly as this sabab. They are literally a divine rope ladder dropped straight from the heavens, inviting humanity to just grasp hold and ascend. So, how do we make the climb? Step 1, you've got to pull yourself out of the rigid, heavy world of solid matter. If you stay trapped in just what you can see and touch, you're going to remain stagnant. Step 2, by grabbing onto the names, you gain the power of abstraction. You elevate your intellect and your soul way beyond the physical constraints of this world. And finally, step 3, by ascending this ladder of understanding, you achieve true spiritual bliss. You align perfectly with your highest self. In fact, the source notes something amazing here. Achieving this profound peace and harmony with your creator means that your heaven has actually already begun, right here, right now. So, I want to leave you with something to really chew on today. Are you actively reaching for that rope ladder? Are you using your completely unique, miraculous human ability to learn and abstract to elevate your soul and discover who you truly are? Or are you, despite all that insane potential, allowing yourself to remain trapped in the heavy, limited world of solid matter? The ladder is right there. The names are waiting. The ascent? Well, that's entirely up to you.
Imagine, just for a moment, that you could create something that outlives you entirely.
Right.
And I don't mean a monument, like not a statue or a name carved into the side of a library building or something, because those are just, static markers of someone who used to exist.
Yeah, they just sit there.
Exactly. What if you could engineer an action? A dynamic, living force that just continues to function and breathe in the world, centuries after your biological clock has totally stopped ticking.
I mean, it fundamentally changes the whole calculus of a human lifespan.
Yeah, it really does.
You transition from thinking about your life as this finite stretch of biological time, maybe 80 or 90 years if you were incredibly lucky, to viewing your life as a launching pad for actions that have an independent and potentially infinite ongoing existence.
Which is just a wild thing to wrap your head around.
It is.
And that profound paradigm shift is the core mission for our deep dive today. We are unpacking this massive, philosophically dense theological lecture by Mustafa İslamoğlu, and the central subject here is the Esmâu'l Husna, which means the beautiful names of Allah. But, and this is super crucial for you listening right now, this is absolutely not a dry vocabulary lesson.
No, definitely not.
It's not some exercise in, memorizing ancient Arabic terminology just for the sake of academic trivia.
Far from it, actually. The framework presented in this source material acts as this highly sophisticated masterclass on human consciousness.
Oh, absolutely.
It uses these ancient concepts to explore the psychological mechanics of our existence. The absolute cognitive miracle of what it means to actually learn something. And it makes this rather bold proposition that studying the architecture of the divine is basically the only reliable shortcut to understanding the architecture of our own minds.
Yeah, and the imagery used right at the outset of the lecture is incredibly vivid. These divine names are not framed as these abstract concepts floating in the ether or, secrets locked away for high-level theologians to debate at some stuffy academic conference.
Right.
They are described functionally as a rope ladder.
I love that metaphor so much.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's this very specific cognitive tool designed to pull the human intellect out of a purely materialistic, gravity-bound worldview and basically elevate it into a higher state of awareness.
And that concept of the rope ladder is going to be central to everything we discuss today. But before anyone can begin climbing, the lecture insists on this sort of grounding exercise.
Yeah, setting the baseline.
Exactly. We have to look at the baseline human condition. Because you cannot attempt to understand the infinite without first confronting the brutal reality of the finite.
Which introduces a rather staggering paradox, honestly, because here's where it gets really interesting. The human being is an intensely limited creature.
Very much so.
Our cognitive bandwidth is super narrow. We can only hold a few variables in our working memory at any given time. Our sensory apparatus is highly restricted. Our eyes only process a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Right. Our ears miss the vast majority of acoustic frequencies in our environment.
Yeah, and our lifespans are, cosmically speaking, just a rounding error. Yet within this specific theological framework, these highly restricted, deeply flawed creatures are tasked with interacting with a limitless absolute reality.
It's the ultimate mismatch in scale.
Totally.
You have a finite consciousness attempting to grasp an infinite existence, and the tension between those two realities is where the concept of Salih Amal comes into play.
Okay, yes. Let's get into Salih Amal.
So it's often translated quite plainly in English as righteous deeds or good works.
Which sounds very, I don't know, Sunday school.
Exactly, it sounds quaint. But that translation completely neuters the ontological weight of the term as it is explored in this lecture.
Let's break down that ontological weight then, because this is where the idea of immortality comes in. The argument presented is that a Salih Amal isn't just you being a polite person or, following a basic moral rule. It posits that a truly righteous deed is actually granted an independent lifespan by the Creator.
Yes. The action basically detaches from the physics of the moment.
Right, where it would normally just dissipate into heat and memory.
Exactly. It detaches and is given a vitality that far exceeds the biological life of the person who initiated it.
To ground this, the lecture brings up some fascinating historical precedents. Look at the Prophet Muhammad and his early companions. In a purely biological sense, they have been dead for over 14 centuries.
Long gone.
Right. Yet their modeled behaviors, their specific actions, what is traditionally referred to as the Sunnah, are not treated as historical artifacts in a museum. They are actively kept alive, they're practiced, they're integrated into the daily routines of hundreds of millions of people today. Those ancient actions have been made completely contemporary.
The actions are literally still walking around in the modern world.
Yeah.
They are in modern living rooms, boardrooms, courtrooms, and it's not just prophets either. The lecture highlights intellectual figures as well.
Like Al-Tabari.
Exactly, the famous scholar Al-Tabari. He passed away over 1,100 years ago, around 310 AH to be specific, and he authored thousands of pages of deeply complex historical and theological commentary. Today, right this very second, there are people sitting at desks across the globe intensely studying, debating, and internalizing texts that he wrote a millennium ago.
Which raises a really fascinating epistemological and historical question. Throughout human history, untold millions of books, scrolls, and manuscripts have been written. The vast, overwhelming majority of them just vanish into complete obscurity.
Oh, rot away.
They rot, they burn, or they simply become totally irrelevant.
Yeah.
So what is the filtering mechanism? Why do some texts from 1,000 years ago survive and remain actively read while something written 20 years ago is already forgotten? Well, actually, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, though. Because if we are saying that a text survives for a millennium due to a divine blessing on the action, we have to acknowledge that there are plenty of terrible, destructive, deeply hateful texts that have also survived for centuries.
Oh, sure.
Does endurance alone equal a divine blessing?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and it goes right to the heart of what Salih Amal actually means. Endurance in the physical world is not the sole metric. A destructive text might survive because it appeals to the baser, more corrupt elements of human nature.
Like it feeds our worst instincts.
Exactly. It operates purely within the gravity of the material, flawed world. The survival the lecture is talking about is an endurance of benefit. It is a vitality that continues to elevate human consciousness century after century. It's not just that the book exists, it's that the book continues to act as a rope ladder for others.
Ah, okay. That makes a lot of sense. It's the qualitative nature of the survival, not just the quantitative measurement of time. And the lecture introduces a really brilliant phrase to describe the ingredient that grants an action this specific type of immortality.
Hard sweat.
Hard sweat. It's such a profound metaphor.
It really is. It separates mechanical effort from spiritual effort.
Right. It's not just the physical sweat of writing words on a page or the mental sweat of structuring a logical argument. It is the deep, agonizing, sincere friction of the soul. The proposition here is that true, sincere effort, this heart sweat, is uniquely recognized by the divine. When you pour that level of profound sincerity into an action, the action is blessed with longevity.
And this brings the entire concept out of the realm of grand historical figures and drops it right into the lap of you, the individual listener. This is fundamentally democratized.
Yeah, it applies to anyone.
It applies to the sheer effort of learning. The source uses a very specific geographic example to illustrate this. The speaker points out that the people attending his lecture, who had to travel from distant cities, places like Bursa, Ankara, or Sakarya, to reach Istanbul, they are engaging in a fundamentally different cognitive and spiritual exercise than someone who just walked across the street.
I love that point. The physical friction of the journey actually alters the value of the knowledge they're acquiring. It's the idea that convenience is the enemy of retention.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like if you just casually consume information, it doesn't leave a mark. But if you have to fight for it, if you have to sacrifice time, money, and comfort, that friction produces the heart sweat necessary to actually anchor the knowledge in your soul.
And the lecture reinforces this by drawing a parallel to a narrative from Surah Yasin in the Quran. It highlights the story of this unnamed man, the hero of the narrative, who comes rushing from, quote, the farthest part of the city. He traverses a massive physical and social distance, putting himself in immense danger simply to speak the truth and support the divine messengers.
And his reward for that specific effort, the effort of crossing the greatest distance, is that his action is immortalized in what is traditionally referred to as the heart of the Quran.
Exactly. He didn't have a grand title. He wasn't a prophet. He was just a guy who put in the maximum amount of heart sweat, and his action was granted an infinite lifespan.
So the immediate takeaway for you, the listener, anytime you're engaging with complex material, is that the difficulty you experience is not a barrier to your learning.
Not at all.
The difficulty is the very mechanism that grants the learning its value. The cognitive struggle is the heart sweat.
Okay, so if generating heart sweat, putting in that agonizing, sincere effort is step one, the baseline requirement, we have to look closely at the objective. What are we actually striving toward?
Yeah, what's the end goal here?
Because the general assumption, especially when you look at religious frameworks from the outside, is that the goal is simply obedience. You know, you learn the rules, you follow the rules, you serve the deity.
Just clock in and clock out.
Right. And that assumption is exactly where the lecture introduces a massive, psychologically complex distinction. It separates the human approach to the divine into two distinct categories that often get clumsily lumped together in English translations.
Ibadah and ubudiyah.
Yes.
This distinction completely changes the framing of the human-divine relationship. Let's look at the standard definition of ibadah first. It's generally translated as worship.
Right.
In practice, it is defined as doing what pleases God. It is heavily action-oriented compliance. You perform the prayers, you give the charity, you fast during the prescribed times, you execute the physical and moral requirements because you recognize the authority of the Creator and you want to align your actions with what is requested.
Ibadah is almost transactional in a sense, though not necessarily in a negative way. It is the fulfillment of duty, it is the baseline of the relationship. You are given a framework and you operate within it.
But then we step into ubudiyah, which represents this staggering psychological leap. It translates closer to deep servitude or absolute devotion. If ibadah is doing what pleases God, ubudiyah is the internal state of being completely fundamentally pleased with whatever God does.
Let's sit with that for a moment, because the psychological mechanics of that state are incredibly difficult to achieve.
Oh, they seem nearly impossible.
Ibadah is about your outward output. You can force yourself to do ibadah. You can physically perform a prayer even if your mind is chaotic or you're having just a terrible day.
Right, you can just go through the motions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ubudiyah, however, is about your internal state of reception. It is absolute, tranquil acceptance of reality as it unfolds, recognizing it as the decree of the divine.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because that is a massive claim to make. I really have to pause and question the mechanics of this because, theoretically, being pleased with the divine decree sounds beautiful when you're sitting in a comfortable room.
Sure.
But what happens when the decree is tragedy? What happens when reality brings immense suffering or illness or just devastating loss? How does a human mind achieve ubudiyah, actual contentment with the decree, in the face of profound pain without simply becoming emotionally numb or delusional?
That is the ultimate test of the concept. And I appreciate that the lecture doesn't shy away from it at all. The answer lies in the transition from viewing God as this distant, arbitrary administrator to viewing the divine through the specific attributes outlined in the Esmâu'l Husna.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the lecture points out a recurring thematic phrase in the theology. God is pleased with them, and they are pleased with God. It is a dynamic of absolute reciprocity.
A mutual relationship rather than a dictatorship.
Precisely. And this is tied directly to the divine name Al-Wadud. Now, Al-Wadud is a highly nuanced term. It translates as the loving, but equally as the beloved.
It's a two-way street.
Yes. It inherently contains this reciprocal dynamic. It suggests a profound ontological architecture where the creator and the created are engaged in a dynamic of satisfying and being satisfied.
Yeah.
Achieving ubudiyya during hardship doesn't mean you enjoy the pain. That would be pathological.
Yeah, it would just be masochism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It means that beneath the pain, there is a bedrock of absolute trust in the ultimate wisdom and mercy of Al-Wadud. You are pleased with the architect, even if you are currently suffering in the construction zone.
That's a great analogy. But that level of trust requires an immense amount of data.
Yeah.
You cannot deeply, genuinely trust a stranger.
No, of course not.
If a stranger in a uniform tells you to do something, you might comply, which is essentially ibadah. You recognize the authority. But if that stranger makes a decision that causes you pain, you won't feel at peace with it. You won't have ubudiyya. You will feel intense resentment.
And that is the exact epistemic barrier the lecture addresses. It argues forcefully that high-quality servitude, genuine ubudiyya, is entirely impossible if you do not intimately know the entity you are serving. You cannot be at peace with a God you do not understand.
Which completely recontextualizes the pursuit of knowledge here. Learning about the divine names is no longer an extracurricular activity for theology nerds.
Right.
It is a fundamental psychological necessity. If you don't know the attributes, the nuances of divine justice, mercy, wisdom, and power, you will inevitably collapse into resentment when the reality of the world pushes against you.
Ignorance of the divine essentially guarantees a fragile psychological state.
So the mandate is clear. We must know the divine to achieve this state of peace. But this is where the source takes a really sharp philosophical pivot. When we talk about knowing God, the default human assumption is to look outward, right?
Yeah, we look at the cosmos, of complexity biology, we look up at the stars.
Exactly. But the framework presented here argues that the journey to understanding the divine is fundamentally an inward journey.
This is where intense theology merges with intense introspection. The lecture leans on a profoundly intimate concept, referencing the idea that God is closer to us than our jugular vein.
Closer than the very blood pulsing through our necks, keeping our brains oxygenated.
It's a statement of absolute, inescapable proximity, and the logical deduction from that premise is critical. If the divine reality is that deeply embedded in the core of your existence, closer to you than your own biological functions, then you cannot possibly travel outward to find it. To get close to God, you must traverse inward. You have to get uncomfortably close to your own core.
The lecture phrases this with incredible clarity. It states that returning to God is, in practical terms, the exact same process as returning to one's true self. The two journeys are functionally identical.
And the inverse of that is where we see the profound psychological implications.
Yeah.
If returning to God is returning to the self, then alienation from God is not just a religious failure, it's a catastrophic psychological failure.
Wow.
Alienation from the divine inherently produces alienation from oneself.
Which speaks directly to the modern condition, doesn't it? The pervasive sense of fragmentation, the feeling of being a stranger in your own mind, the agonizing internal conflict that defines so much of contemporary anxiety.
Oh, absolutely.
The lecture frames all of this not just as a sociological byproduct of the modern world, but as a direct symptom of being disconnected from that innermost divine core.
It connects this to a piece of ancient, universally recognized wisdom. It cites the famous maxim, know thyself.
Right.
Historically, we associate this with the Greek Academy, right? It was inscribed on the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. But the lecture intriguingly suggests that this wisdom predates the Greeks and is deeply rooted in the prophetic tradition, specifically attributing it as a truth carried by Prophet Musa or Moses. The expanded phrasing often cited in these theological circles is, he who knows himself knows his Lord.
It sets up an equation where self-knowledge is the absolute prerequisite to divine knowledge. You cannot skip the grueling work of unpacking your own psyche, confronting your own flaws, and understanding your own psychological architecture if you ever hope to grasp the divine.
Which means studying the Esmâu'l Husna is fundamentally an act of self-discovery.
And that is the realization that completely changes how you interact with this material. When you are studying these 99 names attributes like absolute justice, infinite mercy, unassailable truth, boundless creativity, you are not just cataloging the traits of a distant sovereign, you are looking at the original blueprint of human potential.
Yes.
You are studying the standard that the human consciousness was designed to reflect, albeit in a highly limited, finite capacity.
We are designed as mirrors. We don't possess absolute mercy, but we have the capacity to reflect a finite human version of that divine mercy. We don't possess absolute justice, but we are uniquely equipped to perceive and enact justice in our environment.
But that raises a massive question about our specific place in the universe. If the ultimate goal of existence is this incredibly complex internal journey of self-discovery and divine reflection, why are humans the ones tasked with it? What is it about our specific architecture that equips us for this, especially when, objectively speaking, we are physically quite pathetic?
I love how the lecture handles this. It does a fantastic job of stripping away human physical arrogance. Because we tend to view ourselves as the apex of creation purely based on our dominance. But if you look at the raw biological metrics, we are severely outclassed.
The comparisons used in the source are just brilliant. I mean, if sensory perception were the measure of cosmic superiority, humans would barely register. We already mentioned our limited vision and hearing earlier, but the lecture gets very specific. An elephant's hearing is 100 times better than ours. They can hear subsonic frequencies across miles of dense savanna. A crow has visual acuity that is roughly 200 times sharper than a human's. They process visual information at a speed and resolution we can't even fathom. And a dog's sense of smell is 2,000 times stronger. They perceive this rich, dense, three-dimensional world of chemical information that we are completely numb to.
In the realm of purely physical perception, we are essentially deaf, blind, and numb.
So the source poses this somewhat humorous but deeply philosophical question. If a crow can perceive reality with 200 times more clarity than a human, does that make the crow 200 times more human? Is the crow superior in the hierarchy of existence?
And the answer is obviously no, because the human advantage is not sensory, it is cognitive. And it is a very specific type of cognition. What's fascinating here is that animals, despite their staggering sensory apparatus, operate entirely on processing raw physical data. They react to environmental stimuli, they detect the chemical signature of a predator, and their neurology triggers a flight response. They detect the visual pattern of prey, and they hunt. But they have absolutely zero capacity for abstract conceptual inquiry. They lack what the lecture terms marifatullah, the profound, conceptual, transcendent knowledge of the divine.
Because they lack the one defining miracle of the human condition, talim, the capacity for learning and teaching.
And to underscore the absolute primacy of this capacity, the lecture points back to the historical moment of the first revelation in the Islamic tradition. When the Prophet Muhammad receives the very first transmission of divine communication, what is the subject matter?
It isn't a list of moral commandments.
No.
It isn't an instruction on how to perform a ritual sacrifice or build a temple. The opening imperative of the entire theological framework is purely cognitive.
Reading.
Read.
Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen. It centers the transmission of knowledge, the abstraction of ideas, and the use of the pen, the ultimate tool of recording and teaching, as the foundational interaction between God and humanity.
It is a stunning validation of the intellect, but I want to make sure we clearly separate learning from training, because those two things often get confused.
Oh, absolutely. They are not the same.
You can take an animal, let's use a horse as an analogy. Through a highly structured system of pressure and reward, you can train a horse to perform an incredibly complex dressage routine. The horse learns the physical pattern. It forms a habit. But, as the source jokingly asks, have you ever heard a horse ask a question?
Never. A horse will execute the routine perfectly, but will never stop mid-trot and ask about the historical origins of the dressage movements, or question the underlying biomechanics of its own gait. It responds to the what and the when, but it is entirely incapable of asking why.
Humans are utterly unique because we are, by our very nature, walking interrogations. We do not just react to our environment, we actively interrogate reality. We ask, why did this happen? How does this work? What is the underlying meaning of this event?
And this interrogative nature is tied directly to the theological narrative of human origins presented in the material. It references the story of Adam and the angels. In this narrative, the angels, who are described as beings of pure light, possessing immense power and intellect, utterly devoid of physical flaws, are commanded by God to bow to Adam, a creature made of dense, heavy clay.
Which, on the surface, seems completely counterintuitive. Why would the superior luminous beings bow to mud?
Because the angels were not bowing to Adam's physical form. They were bowing to his unique, God-given capacity for talim. The narrative specifies that God taught Adam the names of all things. While the angels could perceive reality in its absolute purity, Adam was given the ability to abstract, to categorize, to name, and therefore to comprehend and manipulate the essence of reality in a way the angels could not. Epistemology, the capacity to learn and conceptualize, is what elevates humanity above beings of pure intellect.
The ability to grasp an abstract concept is basically our defining superpower. But there is a deeply humbling caveat presented here. The speaker admits that despite all of our modern advancements, despite functional MRI machines, cognitive behavioral science, and neurobiology, the actual fundamental mechanics of how a physical mass of neurons suddenly grasps an immaterial abstract concept remains a complete mystery.
It is the hard problem of consciousness. We can map the blood flow in the brain when learning occurs. We can track the electrical synapses, but the exact moment of comprehension, the spark where a physical brain actually holds a non-physical idea, is still fundamentally a black box. The lecture frames this not as a gap in our science, but as a persistent, daily divine miracle occurring inside our skulls.
So we possess this miraculous, completely unique capacity to learn, and we are tasked with using it to understand the divine names in order to understand ourselves.
Right.
But how do we ensure we are actually doing this correctly? How do we prevent this from just becoming passive information consumption?
Well, the lecture employs a highly effective, almost aggressive technique to address that exact problem. Right in the middle of this dense philosophical exposition, the speaker does something entirely unexpected. He abruptly stops the flow of information and directly confronts the audience, asking them point blank if they are sleeping.
Yeah, I remember that part. It's a brilliant pedagogical moment. He deliberately shatters the rhythm of the lecture. And it's not just a speaker trying to keep the room awake. It's tied to a specific artistic and intellectual theory. The source explicitly references the 20th century German playwright Bertolt Brecht.
Yes. Brecht was revolutionary in how he thought about audience engagement. He developed what is known as the alienation effect, or the distancing effect.
To understand why this matters for theology, we have to look at what Brecht was fighting against. Normally, when you go to the theater or watch a movie, the goal is immersion. The director wants you to forget you are sitting in a chair. They want you to emotionally fuse with the protagonist, to cry when they cry, to be entirely swept up in the illusion.
Right, it induces a state of passive emotional trance. You aren't thinking, you are just feeling.
Exactly. And Brecht viewed that passive trance as intellectually dangerous. He believed that if an audience is simply swept away by emotion, they lose their capacity for critical thought. They leave the theater having had an emotional release, but their minds haven't been challenged. So Brecht would intentionally sabotage the illusion.
He would break the fourth wall.
Yes. Right at the emotional climax of a play, he would have an actor break character, turn around, and speak directly to the audience. Or he would suddenly drop the house lights, illuminating the entire theater.
He would deliberately shock the audience out of their emotional coma. He was effectively screaming, "Wake up! Stop just feeling this. You are in a theater watching a constructed narrative. Use your brain to analyze the political and social dynamics of what is happening on stage."
And the lecture adopts this exact Brechtian philosophy for the acquisition of divine knowledge. The argument is that you cannot approach the study of the divine names or any profound truth in a passive, trance-like state. You cannot simply sit back and let the poetic beauty of the Arabic wash over you, enjoying the emotional warmth of the theology without doing the intellectual heavy lifting.
You have to aggressively wrestle with the concepts. You have to maintain critical distance, ask difficult questions, and stay cognitively awake. You cannot sleepwalk your way to Ubudiyya.
That is such a crucial point.
And to aid in that active wrestling match, we return to the central metaphor of the lecture, the rope ladder. This is where we get a profound linguistic and historical breakdown of the tools we are supposed to be using.
Right. The lecture dives into the Arabic etymology of the word sebab. Now, in modern everyday usage, seb is almost universally translated as reason or cause. If something happens, you ask, what is the sebab?
But the ancient foundational root of the word carries a highly specific physical and visual meaning that completely transforms the metaphor. In ancient Arabic, long before it became an abstract philosophical term, a sebab was a rope ladder.
Wow.
And it wasn't just a generic ladder. It specifically referred to a rope ladder that was dropped from the very top of an incredibly tall, smooth date palm tree to allow someone standing on the ground to climb up and harvest the fruit.
The imagery there is just stunning. When you apply that ancient definition to theology, the lecture is stating that the beautiful names of God are a sebab. They are a rope ladder dropped from the absolute peak of transcendent reality, unrolled all the way down into our dense, physical, mundane world.
It implies that human beings are, by default, stuck at the bottom of the tree. We are immersed in the gravity of the material world. And grasping these names, actively learning and internalizing them, is the only way the human intellect can grip the rungs of that ladder and pull itself upward.
And the lecture issues a very stark warning about what happens if we refuse to climb. It argues that if we ignore the latter, if we remain entirely focused on the horizontal plane of existence, only concerning ourselves with what we can consume, what we can buy, physical pleasures, social status, we undergo a process of profound degradation.
We become hardened. The text uses terms implying a loss of spiritual density. We become base, entirely defined by the physical laws of cause and effect. We become secularized in the deepest sense of the word cut off from any transcendent meaning.
We basically revert to the state of the animals we discussed earlier. We become highly intelligent creatures that simply react to environmental stimuli, entirely devoid of verticality. But by gripping the rungs of the Esmâu'l Husna, we gain altitude. We bring a piece of that elevated consciousness into our present reality. So if the names are the latter, we need to inspect the individual rungs. The lecture provides a very precise linguistic analysis of the phrase itself to help us understand exactly what we are holding on to.
Let's break down the terminology then. The phrase is Esmâu'l Husna. Grammatically, it's an Arabic noun-adjective construct, literally translating to the most beautiful names.
Right.
The lecture briefly touches on the orthography, noting, rather humorously actually, how the adoption of the Latin alphabet and Turkish capitalization rules shifted how the phrase is commonly written today. But the core theological weight remains in the ancient roots of the word Esma.
Esma is the plural of ism, meaning name. And the lecture traces this back to two primary, deeply significant linguistic roots. The first root we need to explore is vesem.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Vesem is a fascinating concept. It fundamentally translates to a mark, a sign, or a distinguishing metal. It implies an identifying brand that communicates the history and quality of the subject. The lecture grounds this with an example from Surah Ali Imran, referencing marked or favorite racehorses. Yes, in the ancient context, a champion horse one that had proven itself in battle or racing didn't just blend in with the herd. It wore specific metals, or it bore distinct physical brands that instantly communicated its elite rank, its lineage, and its history of victory. The mark was undeniable proof of its quality.
And the lecture takes this concept of the vesem and applies it directly to human ontology. It states that human beings, whether we realize it or not, are constantly accumulating and wearing spiritual metals. Every single action we take leaves a mark.
It asserts that in the unseen reality, an individual's spiritual history is glaringly obvious. It suggests that those who consistently engage in destructive, selfish, or sinful behavior carry dark marks or recognizable colors on their spiritual visage.
Yeah.
Conversely, those who engage in Salih Amel, those who operate with heart, sweat, and devotion, carry a distinct lightness, often referred to as the mark of prostration.
Now, wait, let me stop and clarify this immediately, because this concept gets wildly misinterpreted. When people hear mark of prostration, there is a huge tendency to look for physical evidence. Are we talking about a literal physical dark callus on someone's forehead from rubbing a prayer mat?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The lecture fiercely attacks that literalist interpretation. It completely dismisses the idea that a skin abrasion has any spiritual value whatsoever. That is a massive reduction of a profound metaphysical concept into a shallow physical performance.
Oh, good. Because, yes, some people treat that physical bruise as proof of their piety.
Exactly, and the source explicitly refutes that. The mark is entirely internal. It is a spiritual resonance, a glow or a darkness of the character. The lecture explains that this mark is visible to what is often called the eye of the heart. People with deep spiritual intuition can sense the character of a person, or it is visible to angelic beings in the unseen realm. The core idea is that every single choice you make, every time you lie, every time you swallow your pride, every time you give charity in secret, every time you indulge in arrogance, acts as a brushstroke on the canvas of your soul.
You are constantly painting your own spiritual identity. And over time, those brushstrokes accumulate into a highly recognizable portrait. You become the sum total of your spiritual habits.
Which naturally leads to a discussion about spiritual hygiene. Because if our actions are constantly leaving marks, and many of those actions are flawed or selfish, how do we clean the canvas? How do we wash off the bad marks?
Right, what's the soap in this scenario?
Well, the lecture draws a critical distinction between ritual cleaning and existential cleaning. It uses the practice of wudu, the ritual washing of the hands, face, and feet before prayer. Wudu is essential, but it is primarily a physical symbol. It prepares the body. But water cannot wash a soul.
Yeah.
The true ontological washing that removes the dark vesem from the spiritual face is taba deep, agonizing, sincere repentance.
It's the heart sweat applied to regret.
Exactly. And to expand on this idea of comprehensive cleanliness, the lecture quotes a brilliant insight from the 18th century scholar Shah Waliullah Dehlawi. The Lawi's quote is profound. He stated, "Religion is entirely about cleanliness." But he expanded the taxonomy of cleanliness far beyond the physical realm. He argued that faith cleanses the heart of despair. Thinking, rigorous intellectual effort, cleanses the mind of ignorance. Remembering the divine cleanses the memory of triviality. And charity cleanses wealth of greed.
I absolutely love that framework. Thinking cleanses the mind. Active intellectual wrestling is a form of spiritual hygiene. It clears out the cognitive cobwebs, and that elevated state of mind brings us perfectly to the second linguistic root of Esma, which is sumo.
Yes. If Vesm is the mark you acquire, sumu is the trajectory you take. Sumu translates to altitude, elevation, or loftiness. It shares a linguistic root with sima, which refers to the sky or the heavens.
So the very word name in this context implies an upward movement. Grasping the divine names inherently elevates the human consciousness. Just as Adam's ability to conceptualize elevated him above the purely physical superiority of the angels, grasping the Esmâu'l Husna pulls the human mind out of the horizontal flatland of pure materialism and grants it vertical altitude.
But as we climb this ladder, as we gain altitude and begin to understand these attributes, we hit the ultimate epistemological ceiling. We have to confront the big question. Can we ever actually reach the top? Can a finite human mind ever fully, comprehensively understand an infinite God?
This is where the lecture tackles the boundary between what we can know and what must remain unknown. It introduces the concept of Gob, or the unseen.
The lecture maintains that humans are inherently driven to seek answers. We are walking question marks. But it lays down a sobering, absolute limit. We will never get all the answers in this physical world. The physical realm is defined by its incompleteness.
The source argues that total undeniable certainty, the absolute clarity where all questions vanish, which it calls yaqeen, is neurologically and spiritually impossible while we are alive. Yaqeen only arrives at the precise moment of death, when the physical illusion shatters and the unseen reality becomes the seen reality.
But the lecture doesn't frame the unseen as a punishment or withholding of information. It frames the unseen as an absolute philosophical necessity for human existence. It argues that if the Takhalluq did not exist, if the reality of God, the angels, the mechanics of divine justice, and the afterlife were all physically visible, scientifically measurable, and undeniably present in our daily lives, the entire concept of faith, and by extension, human free will, would collapse.
This is a crucial point to unpack. Because if you can see everything with absolute clarity, belief ceases to be a choice. You don't quote-unquote believe in the sun, you just acknowledge it because it's blinding you.
Right.
If the divine reality was equally visible, faith would require zero effort. There would be no heart sweat. Your obedience would simply be the forced compliance of someone staring at an overwhelming, undeniable power.
And if you somehow managed to deny it while staring directly at it, people wouldn't call it a theological rejection, they would just call you crazy. It would be classified as severe clinical insanity. The ambiguity of the unseen is the exact space where human free will operates. The unseen is what makes the choice to climb the ladder meaningful.
So, if the ultimate reality of God remains in the unseen, how do these names actually help us understand the divine without either reducing God to a human level or keeping God so abstract that we can't relate at all?
The lecture explains that the names function by maintaining a razor-thin, perfectly calibrated balance between two opposing philosophical forces, Tashbih and Tanzi.
Let's define these carefully, because the history of theology is basically humans swinging too far in one of these two directions.
Very true. Tashbih is the concept of similarity or comparison. It is the mechanism by which we use our known reality to understand the unknown. For example, we understand the concept of human mercy. We know what it feels like to forgive or to be compassionate. So when the divine is called the most merciful, we use our human experience of mercy as a baseline to grasp the concept.
But the danger of relying purely on Tashbih is anthropomorphism. If we push the comparison too far, we start imagining God as just a very large, very powerful, very nice human being sitting up in the clouds. We reduce the infinite to our own pathetic scale.
Exactly, which is why Tashbih must be violently countered by Tanzi. Tanzi is the declaration of absolute, unbridgeable transcendence. It is the profound acknowledgement that the divine is entirely unlike anything in creation. God is not bound by time, space, physics, or human psychology.
So when we say God is merciful, Tashbih gives us the initial conceptual grasp, but Tanzi immediately reminds us that divine mercy operates on a scale and in a manner that is infinitely beyond our comprehension. The names are the interface. They give us just enough familiarity to prevent total alienation, but they maintain enough transcendence to demand awe.
And this leads to a really fascinating comparative observation made in the source. It contrasts this accessible interface of the divine names with practices found in other ancient traditions.
Oh, right.
It impartially observes that in some historical frameworks, such as certain ancient esoteric Jewish traditions, the ultimate true name of the divine, often represented by the tetragrammaton, Yahweh, is treated with such overwhelming tanzi, such absolute transcendent sanctity that it becomes highly restricted.
Yeah, kept secret.
Yes. In those specific historical contexts, the name was considered unpronounceable for the common person, guarded by specific protocols, and primarily accessible only to a highly educated priesthood or an elite class of rabbis, and sometimes even monetized.
It's interesting to look at the contrast there. Some traditions treat the ultimate divine name as highly restricted, probably out of a profound sense of reverence, keeping it unpronounceable. But the framework we're looking at today, as presented in the lecture, takes the exact opposite approach.
Yes, the lecture strongly emphasizes that the Quranic paradigm actively democratizes the divine names. There is no esoteric restriction. There is no hidden ultimate name that grants secret power to a chosen few. The names are fully pronounced, entirely open, and available to absolutely anyone, whether you are a master theologian at a grand university or a teenager sitting in their bedroom, provided you are willing to generate the heart sweat required to understand them. Truth is not for an elite club.
To bring this massive philosophical journey to a close, we have to look at the absolute peak of tanzi. How is God, at the most fundamental ontological level, different from everything else in existence? The lecture uses this brilliant philosophical analogy involving the difference between identity and essence.
This is a classic ontological distinction, and it perfectly illustrates the final point.
Think about the physical objects around you. Let's take a simple glass cup sitting on a table. The identity of that object, what it functions as, how we interact with it, is a cup. But its essence, what it is fundamentally constructed of, is glass, which is essentially just melted sand, silica, and atoms.
And a crucial observation here is that for the cup, the identity and the essence are two completely separate, divisible things.
Right, and because they are separate, you can destroy the identity without harming the essence. If you take that glass cup and throw it into a 1600-degree industrial furnace, the cup will melt into a glowing puddle. You have utterly destroyed its identity as a cup. It no longer holds water. Its function is totally gone. But the essence, the silica, the atoms, is completely unharmed. And the next day, a glassblower can take that exact same puddle of essence and forge it into a completely new identity, like a picture or a window pane.
The lecture applies this to everything in creation. Look at water. Its identity is water, a liquid that hydrates and extinguishes fire. But its essence is a combination of hydrogen, which is a highly explosive gas, and oxygen, which accelerates combustion. The essence can be separated from the identity. Every single created thing in the universe is a composite. It can be divided, broken down, or melted into a different form.
But this is where the ultimate theological distinction is made. The lecture introduces the divine name Al-Samad.
Al-Samad is one of the most conceptually dense names. It translates to the absolute, the self-sufficient, the indivisible, the impenetrable bedrock of reality.
Because God is Al-Samad, God is the only reality where identity and essence are one and the exact same thing.
It is the ultimate expression of transcendence. The divine is an absolute, perfect, indivisible whole. God cannot be partitioned into elements. The divine cannot be melted down and reshaped into another form because there is no underlying material separate from the divine identity. God does not have mercy as an added attribute. God is mercy. God is the absolute bedrock upon which the entire shifting, melting, composite universe rests.
Trying to hold the concept of an absolutely indivisible reality in a human mind that only understands composites is a staggering cognitive task. But, as we've learned today, that cognitive struggle, that heart sweat, is exactly the point of the exercise. Let's take a deep breath and just look back at the immense terrain we've traversed in this deep dive.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground. We began by redefining immortality, shifting it from physical monuments to the enduring vitality of Islam'l, actions fueled by profound, agonizing sincerity.
We dismantled the simplistic idea of worship, discovering that true servitude, ubudiyya, is the agonizingly difficult yet ultimately peaceful state of being completely content with the divine decree, a state that is literally impossible to achieve without intimately knowing the attributes of the Creator.
We explored the paradox that to know the transcendent God, we must journey inward, confronting the reality that self-alienation and divine alienation are the exact same psychological crisis.
We stripped away our physical arrogance, realizing that our superiority lies not in our senses, but in the divine, unexplained miracle of our cognitive ability to ask why and to learn.
And finally, we gripped the rungs of the Esmâu'l Husna, understanding that these names are an accessible, democratized rope ladder designed to pull our intellects out of the mud of materialism, balancing our desperate need for familiarity with the awe-inspiring reality of the absolute.
It is a phenomenal, exhausting framework to wrestle with, and it demands that we stay awake and active in our own lives. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to carry with you as you step back into your daily routine.
I'm ready for it.
The source tells us that human beings are, at our core, walking question marks, and that the answers we are desperately searching for out in the universe are ultimately answers about our own internal architecture. It posits that every single choice you make, every truth you speak, every moment of patience, and every selfish act you commit is actively painting an invisible, uniquely colored mark or metal on your spiritual identity.
The Vesm.
Exactly. So, if you were to step in front of a truly accurate spiritual mirror today, a mirror that bypassed your physical reflection and only showed the cumulative glowing marks of your choices, your efforts, and your heart sweat, what colors would you see? And what kind of living, breathing legacy are those specific colors painting for the centuries after you're gone?
That is a heavy question. Thank you for climbing with us today.
Keep wrestling with the ideas. We will see you on the next deep dive.
Welcome to The Critique. Today's material is a transcript of a profound lecture exploring the theological and linguistic depths of Esmâu'l Husna, the beautiful names of the divine, and the transformative power of seeking knowledge. Let's dive straight into how we can elevate this piece, because the thematic progression from those opening thoughts on human legacy to the later linguistic breakdown of those divine names feels, well, slightly disjointed. So a key theme running through this material seems to be the stark contrast between human limitation and a limitless legacy.
Right, the whole concept of Saleh Hamal.
Exactly. Setting up our finite physical boundaries against the eternal nature of a righteous deed.
And the author uses Tabari's 1,200-year-old tafsir to anchor that idea, which is just beautiful.
Oh, it really is.
We obviously don't need to rehash the entire historical setup here since the listener is deeply familiar with it, but, we have to acknowledge that it establishes this emotionally resonant, high-stakes philosophy right out of the gate.
It really frames the human experience and our desire for permanence perfectly.
Yeah, totally.
But then, almost immediately after building up this incredibly contemplative spiritual space, we hit what feels like a massive conceptual speed bump.
The linguistics section.
Yeah. We suddenly plunge straight into the etymology of the Arabic word esma. Like, we're dissecting the grammatical roots vesma and sumu.
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered whether the connection between A and B is fully established in the material, or if that's an area to potentially bolster.
Right.
Because reading through that transition, it genuinely feels like stepping off a curb you didn't know was there.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
1 second, you're pondering your own mortality and legacy, and the very next sentence, you're sitting in a highly technical linguistics seminar.
Exactly. The conceptual gap is just, it's too wide. The author spends all this time establishing the weight of a living legacy, but then drops us into dictionary definitions without providing the connective tissue.
It totally throws off the flow.
It does. It essentially forces the reader to build their own bridge between the existential idea of leaving a mark on the world and the literal academic grammar of the words.
Right. Well, what if we treated the linguistic breakdown not as a tangent to be managed, but as the core spiritual metaphor itself?
Wait, say more about that.
Like, what if the grammar lesson is actually the spiritual lesson?
Oh, I love that angle. How do we actually execute that on the page, though? Like, how do we use those definitions as a structural bridge?
Well, think about the root ves. The text later defines it as a mark, a sign, or a medal like those medals given to racing horses to denote their rank.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of presenting that definition in an academic vacuum later on in the lecture, the author could weave it directly into those opening thoughts on legacy.
Ah, I see. So they explicitly state that learning and embodying the divine names is the exact mark or, the medal a believer leaves behind.
Exactly.
The Esma actually becomes the Saleh Hamil that outlives us.
Yes. You use the linguistic definition to prove the spiritual point you just made. And we can even lean heavier into the physical imagery the text already provides. You remember the part about the concept of sima?
The mark of prostration on the believer's face? Yeah, that comes from the same linguistic root, right?
Exactly. But right now, as it's written, we're juggling a lot of separate marks in different sections.
We really are.
We have the horse medal over here, the mark on the face over there, the grammatical root floating somewhere else. It gets a bit tangled.
It does. I mean, I have to admit, when I first read that section, I was a bit confused by how many different directions the metaphor was pulling me.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of.
I understood the individual pieces, sure, but the overarching point was getting kind of blurry.
But if we place that connection right at the transition point, it solves the problem perfectly. Imagine writing something like, just as physical prostration leaves a visible sima, or mark, on the face, understanding the esma leaves a permanent, invisible mark on the soul.
Oh, wow.
And this mark is the legacy that grants us immortality.
That is so much smoother. By doing that, the transition doesn't feel like a lane change at all. The grammar naturally transformed into the theology.
Right. And obviously, these are just a couple of potential avenues. The main takeaway is to fuse the linguistics with the spirituality so the reader never feels like they've abruptly changed subjects.
It's interesting we're talking about keeping the reader immersed in that spiritual legacy, because that brings us to another area where the text, well, it pulls the reader out of the moment.
The administrative stuff?
Yeah. The timeless theological weight of the core message is occasionally diluted by extended administrative tangents and logistical housekeeping.
Yeah, that part was a bit jarring.
Right. Let's look closely at the section discussing the attendees coming from various neighborhoods like Bayram Pasha, Şehirmeni, Pendik, and Fatih, as well as the backstory about visiting Omar Akshu during the holiday.
The conversation that led to launching the monthly lessons?
Exactly. Detailing his failing health and recounting the exact conversation.
Is there a risk that focusing solely on these highly localized, temporal details might alienate a universal audience?
I think so, yeah.
Because if you think about a reader accessing this material years from now, or from a completely different continent, those municipal geography references and scheduling anecdotes act as a massive barrier to entry.
It honestly feels a bit like watching a profound, high-budget documentary about the origins of the universe. And right as you are contemplating the infinite void of space, a local commercial for a plumbing company cuts in.
That is a perfect analogy. It's a severe tonal clash. You're floating in this deep philosophical space, and suddenly you get hit with an administrative roll call.
Because the surrounding text features incredibly resonant universal concepts. We're dealing with the profound idea that he who knows himself knows his Lord, framing the pursuit of knowledge as an inward journey. We're exploring how the act of learning is a miracle uniquely granted to humans. The author sharply contrasts us with animals that possess much stronger physical senses, like the elephant's hearing or the crow's eyesight.
Right, making the brilliant argument that if raw sensory input were the measure of understanding, animals would be our superiors.
Exactly.
It redefines human superiority from the sensory to the intellectual and spiritual. It's massive, mind-expanding stuff.
It really is. But then, interrupting those massive thoughts with local neighborhood names, apologies for past absences, and metaphors about laying telegraph wires, it breaks the immersive tone entirely.
Yeah, pulls you right out.
It pulls you out of a philosophical mindset and drops you into a logistical briefing.
I completely agree. So the fix here is to condense those geographical and administrative acknowledgments. We want to elevate them into a universal metaphor rather than a local roll call.
Right, right.
The goal is to strip away the logistical fluff so the listener stays anchored in the theology without losing the genuine gratitude the author clearly feels for the audience.
How do we execute that practically on the page, though? I mean, instead of listing specific districts like Pendik and Fatih, the author could synthesize the whole sentiment into a single poetic sentence praising those who cross great distances to seek knowledge.
I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this by tying it directly to the theological material that's already in the text. You remember the Quranic reference to the Eat?
Oh, right. The hero from Surah Yasin who comes rushing from the farthest part of the city to speak the truth.
Yes. If the author immediately links that condensed, universal acknowledgement of the audience's travel directly to the yeet metaphor, the local daily commute instantly transforms into a timeless spiritual journey.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It validates the audience's physical effort to attend the lecture, but it keeps the tone strictly philosophical.
That is a fantastic pivot. It makes the audience part of the theology rather than just attendees in a room.
Exactly.
Alternatively, they could reclaim a ton of space by completely removing the backstory about the holiday visit to Omar Okchu. Instead of discussing the logistics of how the monthly schedule was decided, they could use that momentum to dive much deeper into the fascinating contrast made later between angels and humans.
Oh, absolutely. The text briefly notes that angels use given knowledge while humans generate new knowledge by asking questions.
Yeah, I loved that part.
Expanding on that concept serves the ultimate purpose of the piece so much better than scheduling logistics.
Totally. When you explore how humans actively generate knowledge while angels just operate on what's installed, you're leaning into the core promise of the text. And these are just a few editorial choices to keep the pacing tight and the focus universally applicable. It's all about protecting that immersive atmosphere.
Which actually leads us perfectly into the final section, because when that atmosphere is protected, the ideas presented are staggering.
They really are. But the brilliant philosophical distinction drawn between identity and essence at the text's conclusion is rushed and deserves much more breathing room.
The Hüviyet versus Mahiyet section.
Yes. As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that absolutely everything in creation has a separable identity, the Hüviyet, and an essence, the Mahiyet.
Right.
The author gives these wonderful, highly accessible physical examples, like a glass has the identity, the Hüviyet, of a cup, but its essence, its Mahiyet, is atomic, meaning it can be subjected to 1600 degrees of heat, melted down, and transformed into a completely different identity, like a pitcher.
Or take the water analogy.
Yeah, the water analogy.
The water analogy is so strong. Water has the identity of a liquid that famously extinguishes fire. But its essence consists of hydrogen and oxygen.
Right. Two highly combustible, flammable gases. It's wild when you actually stop to think about it. You have hydrogen, which is highly explosive. You have oxygen, which is the very thing fire needs to burn. Put them together, and they put out fires. It's a complete transformation of identity.
Exactly. Everything in the physical universe can be divided, analyzed, or transformed except for the divine.
But the problem is, this highly intellectual, scientific climax is introduced at the very end of the lecture, and it concludes abruptly.
Too abruptly, yeah.
We learn that Allah is Samad, absolute and indivisible, completely unlike the H2O molecules of water, but it just kind of stops there. It doesn't connect the dots back to the beginning.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the earlier discussion on tanzih and tashbih? Because the text spends a lot of time setting up those two opposing poles of theological language earlier on.
Right, tanzih being transcendence, the idea that God is entirely beyond human comprehension and distinct from creation.
Exactly.
Right, and because this final water analogy fails to explicitly connect back to that crucial tension, the ending feels a bit like an isolated shower thought rather than the culminating resolution of the entire piece.
A shower thought, yeah, that's exactly how it feels.
It sets up the tension of tanzih and tasbih early on, but it doesn't use the scientific metaphor to resolve it.
That's spot on. The author needs to make this scientific metaphor do the heavy lifting to explain the theology, giving the conclusion the intellectual and emotional impact it deserves. We need to expand this final analogy to explicitly resolve the theological vocabulary introduced earlier.
Okay, so what I really like about this part is how easily the text can be adjusted to make this connection undeniable.
Yeah?
How would you phrase it to lock those concepts together for the listener?
Well, after explaining that water's essence can be divided into two flammable gases, despite being a fire-extinguishing liquid, the author could explicitly write something like, "This is exactly why tashbih, or earthly comparison, ultimately fails for the divine."
Oh, I like that.
Right? Unlike water, the creator cannot be separated into elemental parts or reduced to a formula. He is samad.
That's fascinating. It really brings the hammer down on why earthly comparisons always fall short eventually. You can't break down the divine into hydrogen and oxygen.
Exactly.
What are the potential limitations or counterarguments to that idea, though? Because absolute transcendence, absolute tanzi, creates a completely different problem.
How so?
If God is completely unknowable and indivisible, how do we relate to him at all? We're right back to feeling distant and disconnected.
Oh, right. And the text actually addresses that brilliantly when discussing the Jewish concept of the unutterable name, Yahweh. It argues that absolute transcendence makes the divine inaccessible to the average person, restricted only to elite scholars or rabbis. But Islam, the text argues, makes the divine names accessible to all.
Right. So how do we bring that accessibility into the water analogy?
And the theological debate. It gives the reader a way to grasp the ungraspable. You get to keep the mystery of the essence while fully engaging with the identity.
Exactly. It ties a perfect bow on the entire lecture. And we should remind the listener that these are just a few pathways.
Sure, absolutely.
The overarching goal is just to ensure the ending hits with maximum impact by tying off all the philosophical threads that were opened earlier in the text. It's all about making sure the reader feels that every concept introduced, from the linguistic roots to the animal senses to the water molecules, all serve a single unified purpose.
Well said. To quickly recap the actionable steps we've covered today. First, use the etymological breakdown of the root words vezem and sumu as a structural bridge, connecting your opening thoughts on legacy directly to the linguistic definition. Second, condense the localized logistical anecdotes into universal metaphors to maintain your immersive contemplative tone. And finally, expand that brilliant closing analogy of water and glass to explicitly resolve the earlier theological tension between tansi and tashbih.
We would absolutely love to see how you integrate these high-level editorial shifts. Please, implement these suggestions and submit the revised material back to the critique so we can continue this exploration together.
Just like any grand architectural blueprint, making sure the structural beams connect perfectly is what allows the entire edifice to stand the test of time.
Welcome to the debate. I am your host, and today I will be playing the advocate.
And I am the dissenter. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, imagine trying to pour the entire ocean into a single standard-sized water glass.
I mean, you would just spill almost all of it.
Exactly. You'd spill it everywhere. And, the few drops you actually managed to capture, they wouldn't really represent the sheer, overwhelming power of the sea at all.
Right. It would just be wet glass at that point.
Yeah. And that is essentially the impossible task humanity attempts when we try to assign a name to the Creator. Because in our everyday lives, naming something is an act of containment.
Oh, absolutely.
You name a stray dog and suddenly it's domesticated, right? It belongs in your house. You name a devastating storm and somehow putting a label on a hurricane makes its chaos feel just a little bit more manageable for the human mind.
Which creates a really fascinating paradox when you cross over into theology. We use finite human language, these little vocalized syllables we've invented, to try and encapsulate the infinite.
Right.
It is honestly an incredibly audacious thing for a human being to do.
It really is. But when you look at the Esmâu'l Husna, which are the beautiful names of Allah in the Islamic tradition, that everyday box of containment just completely shatters.
It does. It totally breaks the mold.
We are looking at a linguistic and philosophical landscape that doesn't just, put a convenient label on a subject. It fundamentally reshapes how human beings interact with the divine. And that brings us to the core tension we are exploring today, drawn directly from the source material's deep analysis of these divine names.
It's a huge topic.
It is. So here is the central question. When examining the nature of the divine names, do they primarily serve to make God immanent and comprehensible, leaving a recognizable mark on human identity in the material world? Or is their core function strictly transcendent, acting as a ladder meant to elevate human consciousness entirely out of the physical realm?
I mean, it is a profound division in how we understand the purpose of revelation itself, and frankly, the purpose of human existence.
I completely agree. And my perspective as the advocate is that the primary power of the names lies in what we call tashbiyah, or immanence. That's the idea of similarity or drawing near.
Okay, so you're leaning into the grounding aspect?
Right. I look closely at the Arabic etymological root of the word name, which is venetism. It literally means a mark, a brand, or a sign. So I believe the material demonstrates that the names are meant to ground us. They make the divine accessible in the here and now.
Well, I understand the comfort in that approach. I look at the other foundational root of the word name, and that is sumu, which means elevation or height.
Okay, the transcendent side.
Exactly. From this perspective, the core function of the names is tenzih, or transcendence. They are a tool of profound abstraction. Rather than bringing God down into the dirt and messiness of the material world, they're designed to pull humanity upward, out of our physical entrapment.
Well, let's unpack the idea of vezm, this concept of the mark, because it is so central to how we experience the world. The material explicitly connects the pursuit of knowing God to the pursuit of knowing oneself.
Right, the internal journey.
Yeah, it cites that ancient wisdom, he who knows himself knows his Lord. To me, this suggests that theology isn't just staring up at the clouds. It is, at its core, a masterclass in human self-discovery. By learning the names of God, we are actually tracing the contours of our own potential.
But how does the physical concept of a mark facilitate an internal spiritual self-discovery? I mean, a mark is fundamentally external.
Think about how we mark things of value in the physical world. The material uses a really striking linguistic analogy here. It points to the phrase ilhoyil muavema, which refers to marked favorite horses.
Oh, right, the racehorses.
Yeah, these are racehorses that have run so well and won so many races that their owners adorn them with medals and distinct markings. Their internal excellence is physically marked upon them for the entire world to see.
Okay, I track that.
And the text extends this directly to human beings. It notes that believers carry a literal and metaphorical mark. The text talks about faces bearing the mark of prostration.
Ah, the physical trace of prayer.
Exactly. It's a visible imprint. The point here is that faith and interaction with the divine names leaves a tangible, recognizable footprint on the human condition in this physical world.
But is the physical world really the ultimate goal here?
Well, the text argues that the names represent God entering the realm of the comprehensible. They bring the infinite down to a level where we can actually touch it, engage with it, and be physically and emotionally marked by it.
I see the appeal of anchoring faith in the tangible. I really do. But there is a massive risk there.
What sort of risk?
If we anchor our understanding of the divine entirely in the physical, we chain ourselves to the very thing the names are meant to help us transcend. Let's look at sumu, that root meaning elevation, which is related to the word for the sky.
Okay.
The text uses a beautiful, very specific metaphor here. It describes the Esmâu'l Husna as a rope ladder from the sky. The Arabic word used is sebeb.
Sebeb, right.
Yeah, and historically that referred to a very specific type of rope ladder used by farmers to climb incredibly tall palm trees to harvest dates. So the namis are that ladder dropped from the heavens.
So the goal is to climb away from the physical world entirely? Just abandon it?
The goal is not to be consumed by it. The material explicitly warns against settling for the world of solid matter. Think about what happens to things that are purely solid, purely material.
They get rigid?
They harden. They become completely inflexible. The text suggests that if human beings remain stuck in the material, our consciousness hardens. We become condemned to a low, base, animalistic existence.
Wow. So materialism is literal hardened consciousness?
Precisely. The true goal of human consciousness is to use that rope ladder to gain the power of abstraction, to elevate the mind to a place of miraj or ascension. To understand God is not to drag him down into the realm of the comprehensible, It is to use the names to elevate our own comprehension toward his absolute, incomparable essence.
I appreciate the beauty of that upward trajectory, I do, but I think we have to contend with the reality of how the divine actually interacts with our physical limitations.
How so?
Let's talk about the limits of the physical world versus righteous action, or Sali Amel. Humans are profoundly limited creatures. Our lives are short, our minds forget things, our physical senses decay over time.
That is undeniably true.
Yet the text argues that we overcome these material limitations precisely through physical, earthly action.
But those actions are fleeting, they don't last.
Are they, though? The material gives the example of the great scholar Taberi. He lived and died over 1,200 years ago. His physical body is long gone.
Right.
Yet his tafsir, his massive commentary on the texts, still holds a place of honor in libraries and in people's hearts today. Why? Because he utilized the physical world. He used the sweat of his brow, the physical ink on the page, the rigorous labor of his mind.
Okay, he left a legacy.
And the text emphasizes that God respects and blesses that human labor. God breathes eternal life into our physical, earthly efforts. To me, this proves that God does not dismiss the material world as some hollow shell we need to escape. He actively participates in it, leaving a permanent, blessed mark upon it through our grounded actions.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. I completely acknowledge the beauty of a 1,200-year-old intellectual legacy. Tabari's work is monumental.
Right, it's undeniable.
But if we are talking about Marifatullah, which is the true, profound, intimate knowledge of God, the physical senses and physical actions are entirely the wrong metric. It's a category error.
A category error?
Yes. The source material makes this devastatingly clear by comparing human physical capabilities to animals.
You mean the literal sensory capabilities?
Precisely. If interacting with the physical world was the primary avenue to knowing God, humanity would be hopelessly outmatched. We wouldn't even be the main characters in the story of faith.
Because our senses are so weak.
Exactly. Look at the text's examples. A crow's vision is 200 times sharper than a human's. It can see details from altitudes we can't even fathom. A dog's sense of smell is 35 times stronger.
Yeah, they perceive a chemical reality completely invisible to us.
Right. An elephant's hearing is 100 times better. And yet, the text points out a crucial fact. None of these animals have any capacity for Marifatullah.
Well, because they don't possess intellect.
Right. They are not burdened with the responsibility of knowing God, despite having infinitely superior physical equipment. Therefore, knowing God simply cannot be rooted in physical perception or mere earthly presence.
Okay, I follow your logic.
If my dog can smell the physical world better than me, but can't know God, then knowing God must reside in the exact thing my dog lacks: intellectual and spiritual abstraction. It is the ability to pull away from the physical data and elevate into the conceptual. That is what separates us from the animal kingdom.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what actually separates us from the animal kingdom, and interestingly, even from the angels.
Oh, the angels too. Okay, go on.
It is not just pure, detached abstraction. It is our active, grounded engagement with knowledge. The text highlights that learning is, in itself, an absolute miracle.
It is definitely a uniquely human trait.
And what defines a being capable of learning? It is the ability to ask questions. Humans look at the dirt, the trees, the stars, and we ask how, why, what, and for what reason.
Yes, humanity is beautifully described as a walking question mark.
A literal walking question mark. When a human being bows their head in thought or in prayer, their posture forms the shape of a question mark. We are fundamentally inquisitive creatures.
That is a great visual.
And the text explicitly contrasts this human trait with the angels. Angels are beings of pure spirit and abstraction, right? But they cannot produce knowledge.
Right. They only execute.
Exactly. They only execute and use the knowledge they are already given. Humans, on the other hand, produce new knowledge. We engage with the physical world, we question our place in it, we experiment, and we generate new understanding. Isn't this active earthly questioning, this very grounded curiosity, the actual mechanism of human superiority described in the text?
I come at it from a different way. The questioning is absolutely vital, but we have to ask ourselves, what are we questioning and what are we ultimately learning?
Okay, what do you think we're learning?
To answer that, the text takes us all the way back to the creation of Adam. The defining moment of human superiority is when God taught Adam the names. But the material is incredibly specific here. God didn't just hand Adam a dictionary.
Right, it wasn't just a vocabulary lesson.
He didn't just teach him vocabulary labels to slap onto physical objects. He taught him the musamma, the true underlying essences of things.
The distinction between the spoken name and the reality it points to.
Right. The word tree is just the name, but the musamma is the biological, atomic, functional reality of the tree. When Adam learned the essences of all things, this knowledge forced the angels to bow to him.
Because he had a deeper understanding.
Because this profound knowledge of essences gave humanity the power to make the material world subservient to them. Ademolu, the son of Adam, made the items of the world his servants. You don't bow to the physical world, you master it.
I see.
You understand its hidden laws so completely that you can rise above it. The entire purpose of naming and knowing is not to stay grounded in the dirt, but to master the material so effectively that humanity can achieve transcendence.
But if we follow this trajectory of pure transcendence to its logical conclusion, I think we run into a massive, almost insurmountable theological problem.
Which is?
If God is purely transcendent, purely abstracted away from our physical reality, doesn't he become entirely unknowable? If he is so far up that rope ladder, how does a regular person ever reach him?
Well, the text openly acknowledges the ontological gap. We cannot fully comprehend the absolute.
But it goes further than just acknowledging the gap. It critiques the danger of widening it. The material offers a very pointed critique of religious traditions that push transcendence too far.
Are you talking about the historical example?
Yes. It explicitly calls out the historical Jewish rabbinical tradition regarding the name of God, Yahweh. In that tradition, according to the text, the name is kept hidden. It is considered so unimaginably transcendent, so detached from common, dirty, human experience, that it becomes unpronounceable.
Right. It becomes a secret known only to a tiny elite of rabbis.
Exactly. It becomes a privatization of the divine. It becomes spiritual elitism. If God is purely abstract, then only the supreme intellectuals or the highest priests get to know him. You have to be part of a special, highly educated club.
So you're saying Islam counters this?
Islam, the text contrasts, does the exact opposite with the Esmâu'l Husna. It commands the vocal pronunciation of the names. It insists that the truth is open to the farmer, the merchant, the child, everyone.
By making it a daily practice.
Yes. By making the names vocalized, memorized, and integrated into daily physical life, God is intentionally brought into human reach. The names are a definitive rejection of a purely unreachable transcendent deity. They are an anchor of ominence that says, I am here and you can speak to me.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the underlying philosophical framework the text uses to explain why that gap exists in the first place?
Go ahead, lay it out.
Yes, the names are verbally accessible. Anyone can say them. But the reality they point to remains fundamentally transcendent because of the inherent structural difference between the creator and the creation.
Okay.
To explain this, the text introduces two vital concepts: huviyet, which is identity or how a thing appears in the world, and mahiyet, which is its true underlying essence.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I'm following this. You're saying the essence of a thing is entirely divorced from how it interacts with the physical world?
Basically, yes.
Because if I touch a hot stove, it burns my hand. That physical reaction feels pretty essential to what the stove is.
It feels essential to your senses, but your senses only interact with its identity, its huviyet. The material uses the analogy of a glass.
A drinking glass?
Yes. In our created physical world, identity and essence are always fractured. They are always separate. A glass appears to your hand to have the identity of a solid, hard object. But if you look at its essence, its mahiyet, it is just a collection of vibrating atoms with vast amounts of empty space between them.
Well, sure, on a molecular level.
Right. You can take that solid glass, heat it to 1600 degrees, melt it down, and blow it into a pitcher or a vase. You completely changed its identity, but you could only do that because its atomic essence allowed for it.
So the physical form is just a temporary arrangement.
Exactly. And the text provides an even more mind-bending example. Water.
Right. Like the liquid that puts out fire?
Exactly. That is its identity. Water has the huviyat of a liquid that extinguishes flames. But what is its mahiyat? What is its true essence?
Well, H2O, right?
Yes, 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. Think about the chemistry here. Hydrogen is a highly combustible explosive gas. Oxygen is a gas that literally accelerates and feeds fire.
Yeah, it's literal rocket fuel.
So the true mathematical essence of water is 2 flammable, burning gases. Yet when they combine in this physical world, their outward identity becomes a liquid that puts out fire.
That is a total contradiction.
It's a total contradiction. In the material world, identity and essence are always fractured, distinct, and often paradoxical.
That is a brilliant analogy. So everything in our physical reality is essentially wearing a mask.
Yes, but God is completely different. The text brings in the theological concept of samayed, the absolute. For God and God alone, huviyat and mahiyat are identical and indivisible.
There is no fracture.
None. He is not made of parts. He is not a collection of attributes glued together. He cannot be melted down, separated into elements, or restructured. His outward identity is exactly his inward essence.
That's heavy.
Because we are fractured beings made of atomic parts, living in a fractured material world of masks. We are fundamentally incapable of fully capturing an indivisible, absolute unity.
We just don't have the hardware for it.
We can pronounce the names, yes, but we must have the intellectual humility to recognize that those names point to a transcendent unity that our fragmented minds can never fully grasp. The names are the ladder we climb, knowing full well we will never reach the very top in this lifetime.
Which brings us back to the inherent tension the material sets up so beautifully. It seems to me that the text explicitly states that understanding the Esmâu'l Husna requires living precisely in the uncomfortable space between these 2 poles.
Tashbih and tanzih.
Yes, tashbih and tanzih, similarity and incomparability, immanence and transcendence.
It is the ultimate tightrope walk. Neither absolute immanence nor absolute transcendence captures the whole truth of the material.
No, they don't.
If you go too far into immanence, you reduce God to a physical object. If you go too far into transcendence, you make him a mathematical equation nobody can speak to.
Right. And from my perspective, maintaining a strong grip on Vesma, the mark, is what keeps religion from floating away into purely academic abstraction. The names must remain a comprehensible mirror for self-knowledge.
Grounding us in the present.
Exactly. When the text says that learning the names of God is actually a class in learning about ourselves, it grounds the infinite in the deeply personal. The names place a recognizable mark of faith upon the believer. They allow us to walk through the physical world not just as confused observers, but as active participants bearing the imprint of the divine in our everyday actions.
And yet, if we don't recognize the constant pull of Esmâu'l, the elevation, we risk becoming entirely mundane.
Fair point.
My perspective remains that the names are, first and foremost, a divine ladder. They grant us the uniquely human power to elevate our consciousness beyond the razor-sharp, but ultimately hollow animalistic senses we possess.
They push us further.
They teach us the true essences of reality, allowing us to master the physical world rather than be mastered by it. The names demand that we do not settle for the hardened world of solid matter, but that we constantly strive toward an abstract, transcendent reality that is greater than ourselves.
It is a remarkable duality to consider. And I think both of us have arrived exactly where the source material intended, identifying that the beautiful names perfectly balance these 2 immense forces.
They really do.
They bring the divine close enough to touch and vocalize, while keeping the ultimate essence elevated safely beyond our total grasp.
It means that the pursuit of understanding these names is not a task you can just check off a list. It is a lifelong process of climbing and grounding, reaching up and reaching in over and over again.
A lifelong exploration indeed. We started this conversation by talking about how naming something in the physical world usually puts a neat little box around it.
But the Esmâu'l Husna do the exact opposite.
They take our finite, comfortable human reality and break the box wide open. The only question left for the listener to ponder is whether in your own pursuit of understanding the world around you,
You feel more drawn to the grounding, intimate marks of faith or the ascending, limitless ladder of abstraction.